Wonder Woman is a great hero. As a character, she's got some compelling depth just in general, and as a comic book role model, she's got a depth of history that's longer and more robust than pretty much any other female superhero. She's strong, she's independent, and at least in her modern iterations, she's pretty secure in her self-image. All good things to see. So I love Wonder Woman. I think that DC has done some amazing things with her character the past few years, including in her solo film back in 2017. Wonder Woman 84, on the other hand, I have more mixed feelings about. Right up front, I thought the movie was fun. Sitting at home on my couch, because theaters are a scary proposition right now, I did appreciate having a full surround system, but despite lacking the full big screen experience, I did have fun. Generally speaking, the effects were great, the bright and color-infused cinematography was a bit jarring at times, but was generally lovely considering how washed out DC films of yore used to be. For the most part, I liked the story and the characters in the story, but there were some sticking points that managed to stick me, particularly in how the characters relate to the events of the story. Let's talk about the conflict in this movie. The two main buckets of conflict, as is typical for your mass-marketable entertainment, are your external world conflicts and internal character conflicts. The external conflict is, of course, the whole Max Lord is going to basically destroy the world over his greed thing. In terms of evil villain plots, it's nothing exceptional. Then we have a few points of internal character conflict, and here's where I started to have some issues. Diana is, of course, dealing with the conflict of wanting to save the world from what is literally referred to throughout the movie as a monkey's paw despite being a rock, and wanting to have a boyfriend. I swear, it doesn't come across as lame as I just made it sound. Steve is dealing with the conflict of wanting to save the world from what is frequently referred to as a rock but which spends most of the runtime actually being a dude, and wanting to go on body snatching some poor guy out of the life he was already living. That one actually does come across as creepy as it sounds, but on the plus side, Chris Pine is really fun to watch. His performance manages to carry Steve's character. Then there's Max Lord, whose internal conflict is actually pretty nuanced. He's painted a picture of what he's like to the world, that of a successful businessman, and he's dealing with the internal conflict of knowing that's just a front. He's also made a series of promises to his son, and he's desperately trying to fulfill them while knowing he's been lying to his son to buy time. Later on in the movie, we find out that, spoilers, Max is dealing with the trauma of a father whose love he had to earn. He's been struggling, in the background, with the idea that he somehow has to earn the love of his son, and in pursuit of the success he imagines that will take, he's become caught up in greed. If it wasn't clear already, Max was my main draw for the film. I do enjoy a good dumb action movie, but there wasn't enough action in here for Wonder Woman 84 to win on that front. But the character of Max Lord has more than enough pull to keep me engaged when nobody is throwing any punches, or shooting any bullets, as is more often the case when your hero is as OP as Wonder Woman. And while it's totally fair to say that a good chunk of Max's draw is down to Pedro Pascal chewing the scenery with the kind of fabulous 80s charm I seriously doubt most actors could manage, that's selling short the complexity of his character and motivations, and the ending hinging around him finally taking the time to notice that not only is his greed not earning him his son's love the way he thought it would, but that it's actually hurting his son, was in my opinion way better than the ending of the first movie. The lasso of truth being involved in that perspective makes enough sense to me to slide by, and tangentially justifies Wonder Woman's involvement in the story. She does save the world, but not by punching someone really hard. She saves the world by peeling back the lies one man is telling himself, something she has prepared for by forcing herself to look through the lies that she was telling herself earlier in the film. The ending also finally justifies the flashback at the very beginning of the movie, which is known as bookending, and works very well. So on the strength of Max's conflict and Diana's arc, I would say that the movie is perfectly enjoyable and definitely worth a watch in the safest quarters you can get, which is probably going to be HBO Max for a while. But of course that doesn't mean that the film is not without its problems. Let's start with the main character who I didn't mention earlier when we were talking about internal conflict. Because Cheetah was not, unfortunately, internally conflicted. She starts out with some minor external conflict, her being forgettable and socially awkward, but her monkey's paw's secondary conflict is, she gets what she wants and we find out she's a little power hungry. We've got nothing to say that's not how she would have turned out if she'd gotten a promotion or something like that, aside from a really toss-out line from Diana that didn't really sit with me at all. She doesn't seem to have any internal conflict related to her refusal to renounce her wish, which I guess means we'll probably be seeing her at some point in the future. I don't have any compelling reason to look forward to that. I also don't really see what function she had in the overall story other than a physical presence that could stand up to Diana. They felt like they needed a superpowered foe for her to clash with, and that has a similar effect to the introduction of Ares at the end of the last movie. Specifically, it throws me violently from the story and makes me frustrated. The most interesting thing Diana was fighting throughout the movie was her own conflicting desires. If you felt like you needed some big obstacle right at the end of the movie, what was wrong with just more soldiers, or like a big door or something? And don't try and tell me that Cheetah is there to help demonstrate what a good person Diana is. Aside from what came across as a pity dinner, Diana is basically just a good coworker. They have like zero rapport, and when they clash in the White House, the fight has no emotional stake on that front. There's also that Aztec guy who, well, that was convenient, but seriously, where did he come from? Where did he go? And then there's the armor. You know the stuff, the golden stuff. The suit that was there probably exclusively to justify merchandise for this movie. It has bum-all impact on the plot or characters, and despite its invulnerability being talked up earlier, a cat rips it to shreds within minutes of Diana putting it on. It's really dumb, and what annoys me the most is that it didn't have to be. The armor was the most fixable issue with this movie, with a bit of imagination and probably way more CG budget, if I'm being honest. Diana and Steve have just had their argument about how Diana needs to renounce her wish. She needs to get her powers back so she can stop Max from destroying civilization, because monkeys rock pop. She goes into her surveillance room. Steve sees the armor and asks about it. Diana distractedly tells him about Asteria. Steve pulls the cover off and Diana has a realization. This is the other way she was just insisting there was a minute ago. She dons the armor and prepares to go after Lord, who she's just seen is on his way to the White House because, like, sure, surveillance room. Whatever. Steve tries to talk her down, tries to insist that the armor isn't going to make up for her missing powers, it won't take the place of what she's losing, yada yada. But Diana ignores him and flies off out the window because the armor has wings, so duh. That particular detail also lends a bit more weight to her learning to fly unassisted later on. On that note, I'd also like to add a line to Steve when they're flying the invisible jet about how it's isolating him from the flying he'd really like to do, considering we're just pretending that World War I era biplanes and 1980s era jet fighters are equivalent in terms of flight complexity. That gives her flashback to his talking about how to fly a little more meaning when she's figuring out unassisted flying, as if the armor is like an isolating jet, and it isn't until she's out of it that she can understand what Steve meant. So she flies to the White House, but she's too late to stop Max from taking over the government, so now she's public enemy number one. She's depowered, but the armor is in fact really good, protecting her from bullets and blows, allowing her to shrug off some good hits while she chases Max out onto the lawn. She doesn't quite get to him before he's in the helicopter, and she has to fight with Cheetah on the ground still, because sure, she's in the movie, why not? During the fight, she realizes that the lasso of truth isn't responding to her anymore, because, she's been lying to herself. But even with that handicap, the armor is really good. She beats Cheetah and flies off after the helicopter. But then she's intercepted by the Air Force, because she's an unidentified flying object in the White House's airspace during the freaking Cold War. Come on, this is obvious stuff. She has to break off pursuit of the chopper to try and shake the jets, but she can't. The armor is good, but not Sidewinder missile good, and eventually she gets shot and loses a wing or two. And she starts to fall, because she hasn't figured out how to fly yet. The lasso doesn't work for her, and it looks like she's going to plummet to her death. But then Steve catches her on the wing of the invisible jet. He lands with her, she's hurt, and has hit her lowest point, and that gives them the opportunity to pick right back up where the movie actually went. They have their conversation, she renounces her wish, Steve is gone, she heals, the lasso starts working again, she figures out how to fly. Max does his broadcast thing, she has to contend with a giant door, or whatever is a final obstacle because Cheetah is still in DC because of course she is. Finn. If I'm getting everything I want, she would have set up the armor earlier in the movie, possibly via a conversation with somebody at the Smithsonian about an artifact she'd been hunting, or something she'd asked somebody else to research, etc. For my money, that would have improved the movie immensely. Those are far from the only issues I had from the movie, like for instance how apparently Diana's powers are what she values most, not her memories of her childhood, and how the 80s color palette didn't ever feel fully justified in this movie, which leaves it feeling more like a ripoff of Thor Ragnarok than a deliberate creative choice. But my overall conclusion is that while there are certainly issues, the movie is fun to watch. In the end, the moment when Max realized that he didn't need to earn his son's love by giving him things, he just needed to spend time with him and love him back, justified the viewing experience for me. And while I recognize that may have quite a bit to do with the fact that I'm a dad myself, I suspect that there is a lot in that relationship that people are going to connect with in a very broad sense. Besides, it's Pedro Pascal. He made you like a faceless, toneless Mandalorian. Just imagine what he can do with facial expressions to work with.